Today we're going to be learning Ketubot Daf Mem. We're going to start at the very bottom of Lamed Tet Amud Bet. So we had this line that was a little bit difficult in the Mishnah, Ones Shoteh Ba'atzitzo. I need to better translate it. Atzitzo, I always think of atzitz as a plant, but it comes from the planter, the vessel. What it means is he drinks from his vessel. He chose this vessel. This is the vessel he has to drink from, right? He chose to rape this woman, so he now needs to be married to her. So Amale Rava mi Prarzakya le Ravashi. This is, if you remember, this is one of the differences between the ones and the mefateh, the one who seduces. He doesn't have to marry her. To which, right, we didn't have an explanation yesterday. It was obvious to the Gemara that, and to the Mishnah that he doesn't. The question is, where did they get it from? So Michdi Migmar Gamre Mehadade, if we're going to learn from each other, one from the other, where we know we learn the rape and certain things we learn from one to the other. So why don't we learn this one also, one from the other? To which they say, in the pasuk about Ki Fateh, it says, if he seduces a woman who's a virgin, who is not engaged, and he sleeps with her, he basically marries her, right, with a dowry, all that. Anyway, what it means, what they learn from here is lo. To him, lo means lida'ato. It has to be with him being a willing participant. If he's not willing, he doesn't have to marry her. Ketzat, again, obviously he still has to pay her, right? But that was what we saw yesterday. If he decides not to marry her, then he has to pay her the money. Ketzat shoteh ba'atzitzo v'chulei, and really the part they're getting to is the end part of the Mishnah, which is, what if she's forbidden to marry, right? If she's a woman who he can't marry, then he can't marry her. To which Amar Rav Kahana says, Amarita l'shmata kamei Rav Zvi min Nahardea. I said this following halacha in front of Rav Zvi in Nahardea. Nete ase v'nitcha lo tase. Why don't we have a mitzvah ase come and dochet? Why don't we say the mitzvah ase of he's supposed to marry her should override the lo tase of it's forbidden because she's a mamzer, let's say. So Amar Li, he said to me, right, this happens not very often, but it does happen, where a mitzvah aseh will override a lo taseh. Positive commandment overrides a negative commandment. So he said to me when I said this in front of Rav Zvid answered me and said, Heicha amrina nete aseh v'nitche lo taseh. What's a case where we say it? Kigon mila b'tzarat. Okay, you're not allowed to cut off a leprous mark. But if you have to do a brit milah, and right there where you're doing the brit milah is a leprous mark and you're going to cut it off, you're allowed to. That's a case where an aseh, he basically says, let's take an example and let's show how that example is different. Why is that different? There's no other way to do the mitzvah aseh if you don't cut off that leprous mark. Aval hacha, but here, right, because basically it's in the spot where you're doing the brit milah. Aval hacha, I amra de lo be'ena mi'itel aseh klal. But here there's a way around the mitzvah aseh. If she says, I don't want to get married to him, then there's no mitzvah aseh anymore. So basically, since that's the case, therefore, it's not a strong enough mitzvah aseh to override a negative commandment. New Mishnah. Bit of a hard to understand Mishnah, and the Gemara is going to struggle with it as well. You'll see why. It's not hard. It's just hard to understand why it's here. I want to just remind you of the Mishnayot. 2 Mishnayot ago, we had this Mishnah where Na'ara shenitar savenit garsha, she was betrothed and then divorced. Rabbi Yossi Aglili said she doesn't get knas, and Rabbi Akiva said she gets knas and the knas goes to herself. Then we have Rabbi Akiva the bright who said she gets knas, the knas goes to the father. And then we had this other Mishnah setting up the difference between the onus and the mafate. And now it's like we're going back to that issue, not even relating to it at all, and just quoting somebody else who has something to say about this. So it's a bit strange why this Mishnah is here. I will kind of raise it as a question. I don't really have a good answer, but you can see that Gemara is also a little bit struggling with it. So we have a yitoma, an orphan. Shenitar savenit garsha. So it's really the same case, except that she's an orphan who is betrothed and then divorced. Rabbi Elazar omer, ha'ones chayav mefateh patur. If it's a rape case, he has to pay. If she was seduced, he doesn't have to pay. Why doesn't he have to pay? Because there is no father, right? He didn't do anything wrong to the woman because she was a willing participant. Right? When there's a father, yes. There's no father here, right? And here, she's got double. She's an orphan, and she was already betrothed. So, Amar Rabbi Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Elazar, B'shitat Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Amar. Okay, Rabbi Elazar is Rabbi Elazar ben Shammai. He was one of the 5 famous Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva. After everyone died, there were 5 Talmidim. I remember all of Rabbi Akiva's, many of his students died. 5 Talmidim who basically kept the Torah going. One was Rabbi Elazar ben Shammua. So he goes in the approach of Rabbi Akiva, his rabbi. Ta'amal yesh knas uknasa latzma. Says, right, there's knas and the knas goes to herself. To which the Gemara asks, Mimai, from where are you getting this? Mida katani yitoma. Rabbi Elazar omer ha'ones chayavim b'pateh patul. Yitoma pshita. In other words, from the fact that he added on a yitoma, that not only nitar sav and nitgarsha, but specifically that she's the yitoma, say the yitoma, the fact that he added on yitoma makes it clear that he's holding like Rabbi Akiva, but that doesn't make any sense because a yitoma case is obvious. Anyone would agree that an orphan, in other words, this doesn't have to do with Rabbi Akiva. This is anyone who's an orphan, right, will get the knas, okay? So it has nothing to do with nit arsa or nit garsha, right? Just the fact that by virtue of her being a yitoma, she'll get the knas herself. Elaha kamashva. What he wants to say is, no, you misunderstood the Mishnah. This is how to read the Mishnah. Tinara shenit arsa v'nit garsha ki yitoma. A woman who is betrothed and then divorced is like a yitoma. Now we're saying that he's teaching us exactly Rabbi Akiva. Ma yitoma la'atzma, af nara shenit arsa v'nit garsha le'atzma. It's not one case, a yitoma who got an orphan, who got betrothed and divorced. No, it's two different cases, a yitoma and a woman who nit arsa v'nit garsha. And what he's trying to say is they're both the same. Yitoma is obvious, but nit arsa v'nit garsha is not as obvious, and therefore what he's trying to teach you here is I hold like Rabbi Akiva. Again, it's hard to understand why there's another Mishnah in between here, why we wouldn't have had this right after it, why Rabbi Yehuda Nasi put this as a separate Mishnah if he's only holding like Rabbi Akiva. Anyway, maybe it was to stress that we hold this way. And again, it still doesn't explain the order. I didn't have a chance to look at Mishnah Eretz Yisrael, but possibly I would imagine he addresses this issue. So give you homework. You can look on Sefaria. If your Hebrew is good, you can read Mishnah Eretz Yisrael on the Mishnah here. If you look it up, the easiest way to find it is on the Mishnah. If you look up the Mishnah, Ketubot, Perek, Shlishi, and then you figure out which number Mishnah this is, and on that you can find the commentary of Mishnah Eretz Yisrael. It's a more academic approach. Perhaps he addresses this. Amar Rabbi Zera, Amar Rabba Bar Shila, Amar Rav Hamnuna Saba, Amar Rav Ad Bar Ava, Amar Rav. Okay, each pass it down the name of the next. Halachat ki Rabbi Elazar. We pass him like Rabbi Elazar. Kara Rav Alei de Rabbi Elazar. Rav called him Tuvina de Chakima. He's the best of the Chachamim. Okay, very smart rabbi. New Mishnah. Now we're going to get to Ezehu Boshet. Okay, by the way, this really shows that this is out of place because this Mishnah is now going back to the Mishnah on Daf Lamed Tet, which talked about Boshet and Pgam. And I told you we're going to wait till we have the explanation of what exactly is Boshet, what is Pgam. Okay, Boshet is the embarrassment, the humiliation, and Pgam could be described as the degradation. Okay, we're going to see what exactly the difference is. Ezu Boshet, hakol lefi hamivayesh vehamitvayesh. There's many different commentaries about what this means exactly, but it all goes based on, okay, the best explanation I like is the one that says, we assess it based on each individual opinion, who the person was who raped her, who the person was who got raped, and how much embarrassment this caused, right? How much embarrassment this caused her based on who she was raped by and who she is, like where she is in society. Some people say some people give clear rules because it's hard to say, oh, well, it all depends, right? It's hard to know how to draw the lines. So some people say it might depend on, right, where she was in society, where her wealth factor is, or if her family was a family miyuchasim, or, maybe it has to do with that. Or maybe it has to do with who he was, right? What his stature was. And then how that affects, people could have different opinions. Is it more embarrassing to be raped by someone who's an important, prominent person? Or is it more embarrassing to be raped by someone who's a less prominent person? So there's a whole range of opinions about this, which makes sense because it's a very unclear issue. Pgam. So what's this degradation? How do we measure that? Well, what we're really measuring here is the fact that she was a virgin and now she's not a virgin. Okay, we're not really talking about the pgam caused because she was raped, and perhaps one would say, oh, well, maybe that put her in a different place in society, the way people looked at her. No, that's not the issue. The issue here is what her difference is now that she's no longer a virgin. Okay, there's a certain pgam in a woman. Now, again, it's harder to understand in our day, But in those days, a woman who was a virgin, we already know this. We saw this from the beginning of the Masechet, is in a different status in society than a woman who's not a virgin, particularly as relates to getting married. So how do we assess? So the way we assess, a little maybe, I don't know, disturbing but complicated, we're going to look at a servant, okay, a slave woman who's going to be sold at the marketplace. Because in general, when we look, okay, this happens, by the way, in damages. It's not just by a woman who's not a virgin anymore, but in laws of damages, we also, somebody breaks her arm. So we look at the value of a slave in the marketplace. What are they worth with an arm? What are they worth if they don't have an arm? And then that's the value of the damage, right? That's how we assess one of the elements of the damages you pay for breaking someone's arm. So the pgam, so we view her as if she's a slave woman being sold in the marketplace. How much she was worth as a virgin and how much she would be worth if she's not a virgin, right? Different slave women, right? They get sold in the shuk. What's the price difference? Gemara is going to say, what does being a virgin or not a virgin, I'm sure you're wondering this, have anything to do with a slave woman, right? A slave woman is not there for the master to sleep with. So what should that make a difference? So the Gemara will get to that. Knas shaveh b'chol adam. Okay, now the knas payment, as opposed to the pgam and the boshet, which depend on the situation, as we just explained, the knas is something that's equal for every person. That's what we saw in the Torah. Kol sheyesh lo kitzba min haTorah shaveh b'chol adam. It's the 50 kesef. Whenever we have a set amount in the Torah, today we're going to see another example of that. We saw one about erchim, right, where the value, if you give your value of a person to the temple, there's a set value depending on your sex, depending on your age. It's a set value. That doesn't change. You could be a very prominent person. You could be a very non-prominent person. It doesn't matter. All the same. When the Torah gives a value, it's a specific value. That value is a constant. So the knas doesn't change. So now the Gemara says, maybe I agree with you that there's boshet, there's pgam, there's the knas payment, there's the tzal, but who's to say that 50 shekel amount doesn't include the boshet and the pgam in that payment? Maybe it's not just the penalty, the fine, but it includes the boshet and the pgam. So Rabbi Zera is going to attempt in two different ways. Abaye knocks him out entirely, both of them. Is going to try to explain why he thinks it's clear that it wouldn't be a set amount for boshet and pgam. So yomru ba'al bat malachim chamishim, ba'al bat hadyotot chamishim. What you're going to say, it's the same amount for somebody who raped the daughter of kings and someone who raped the daughter of an average person? Amar le Abaye. Abaye says, yeah, why not? Ihachi, I'll give you an example in the Torah where they don't distinguish this. Gabe eved nami. Here's a case where my ox killed a slave. So the halacha is that I have to pay 30 shkalim. There's a set amount. It doesn't matter what kind of slave. So comes Abaye and he says, Yomru eved nokev margaliot shlashim, a slave who pierces pearls, which is obviously a very specialty job, would get, his value is 30. And eved oseh maaseh machat shloshim, and a slave who's just a tailor is going to get 30. Guess what? The Torah doesn't distinguish. So if it doesn't distinguish there, maybe it doesn't distinguish by rape either. Okay, we're now on Amabed, top of Amabed. So he tries a second attempt. He says, what about this? If two people rape the same woman, but okay, the first one did it shelo kedarka, which was anal, which means he raped her without her losing her virginity. So when the second one raped her, he's also liable for rape because she was still a virgin. Now, they're both going to have to pay. So comes Rabbi Zera and he says, obviously there's a difference here. And obviously this is going to prove that boshet and pgam are not included in this one lump sum payment of the knas, which everyone gets the same, because ba'al shleima chamishim, ba'al pnuma chamishim. You're going to say she was whole and complete when the first one raped her, but she was already wounded or injured or degraded, you could say, right, from the lashon of pgam. She was degraded already after the first rape. So there's less degradation involved in the second. Okay, so basically he's going to say, obviously we're going to distinguish here. So that's my proof. Amar Abaye says, I don't buy that either. Ihachi gabe eved nami. Let's compare eved. You said shleima and puma, so let's talk about an eved. Eved nami, yomu eved barish shloshim, eved mukachchin shloshim. But by the Torah says, it doesn't matter whether the slave was totally healthy, or he had boils all over his body. Either way, it's still 30 if you kill the slave. So I don't buy your answer, says Abai. So we're now going to have Rava and Abai each bring a pasuk from where we learn that knas does not include the boshet and the pagam. That's the 50 shekel isn't for knas, boshet, and pagam, and obviously we'd have to include sa'ar as well. So Amar Abai, Amar Kra, tachat asher ina. When it says that he has to pay her the 50 shekel, it says 50 kasef. It says because he afflicted her. Hane tachat asher ina, michlal di'ika boshet upgam. It sounds like the 50 is because he afflicted her. But in addition, there's other payments. And it sounds like we're saying this goes for that, which means something else goes for something else. We saw this before. So we actually saw Abaye also before. So Rava says, the pasuk says, "V'natan ha'ish," the person, the man, hashochevima, who slept with her, gives la'avia na'ara 50 kasef. That's the beginning part of the pasuk. So they say, why do you need ha'ish hashochev? Obviously, it's the ish hashochev. Who else is paying the money here? No one else is paying the money except for the rapist. So they say, why does it say ha'ish hashochev? It defines the 50 shekel, the 50 kasef. It's hana'at shchiva 50. It's for the fact that he benefited from sleeping with this woman who he wasn't, right? It wasn't his to sleep with, and he raped her. For that, he pays the 50. Again, Michal, from there you can infer di'ika boshet upgam, that there's other payments as well. Now we're going to ask another question. Ve'ema lidida. Why shouldn't she get the money? Why does the father get the boshet and pagam? Okay, the knas, it says so in the Torah. There's no way around it. But the boshet and the pagam, she suffered. She should get the money. So Amar Kra, right? This is what you would think, right? Wouldn't it go to the woman? Well, Amar Kra, the pasuk says, by and vows, in the laws of annulling vows, the father's allowed to annul the vows of his daughter. It says, bid'ureha beit avia. What they learn from there, right? It says, these are the laws, Asher Tzivah Hashem et Moshe, ben ish li'ishto, between a husband and wife, because the husband can annul the vows, ben av libito, between a father and his daughter, bin ureha, when she's in her na'arut, beit avia, she's in her father's house. So they learn from here, they darshan this pasuk, kol shevach neureha la'avia, any kind of money that she has when she's in a na'ara, when she's young, goes to her father. So we're going to have a bit of a problem with this drasha. Ella, if that's the case, and we learn it all from Nidarim, everything she gets goes to her father, so then the boshet and the pagam go to the father. Well, Elahad Amar Rav Huna Marav, Rav Huna learned in the name of Rav a different drasha in a different case, where he's going to learn a drasha that says the father gets certain money from the daughter. You wouldn't need that if you had this bin ureha beit avia. So we're going to raise a question about that from here. So what does Rav Huna say in the name of Rav? How do you know that if she works, the money she makes at a job goes straight to her father? We're learning this now. It's something that's going to come up in the next Mishnah. A father has the right to sell his daughter to be a slave. Okay, he can do that. We'll see exactly what the age range he could do that. But he's allowed to sell his daughter to be a slave. Okay, now, this happened very often when people had no money, right? It happened even 100 years ago. I don't know how many years ago, but, it still probably goes on in certain places where people basically, the daughter goes to be a slave. She works there. She gets paid by food, she gets food and all that. And, right, that provides her with what her father can't provide her with, which is food and living space. So it gives her food. And then the idea is in the Torah that theoretically maybe the master or the son will end up marrying her. Anyway, that's a whole interesting section that's hard to imagine nowadays. But anyway, it says here, when he sells his daughter to be a slave woman, you don't need to be a slave woman. If he's selling his daughter, obviously he's selling her into slavery. So what do they learn from the fact that it adds this word ama, and it's right next to the word bat? Well, they're going to compare a daughter to a slave woman. Ma ama rabba, just like a maidservant, anything she works for goes straight to her master, right? He basically gives her food and place to sleep, and she gives all her salary to him. Likewise, the daughter, everything goes to the father. So, lamali, why do you need that drasha for? If everything of her goes to the father, that would include her salary as well. So now they say, no. You really can't learn from that pasuk. Why? That pasuk is about vows. And therefore, you can't learn from there to anything else. So now, in other words, first we're going to say you can't learn from there to the salary issue. But we're also going to say then you can't learn there for Boshet and Pagam either. So, right? So because it's about Nidarim, you can't learn from there. You might say, why not? Let's learn from there anyway. You can't learn monetary cases from Isur Beheter cases. Yet, right? Things that are forbidden or permitted. Nidarim is something that goes into the realm of Isur Beheter. It's not a monetary issue. So therefore, you can't learn that to teach you about financial issues. Maybe you can learn it from the knas. The knas of the rapist, right, goes to the father. That's clear from the verse. Our question is about the boshet and the pgam, but the knas clearly goes to the father. So maybe you could learn from there to this halacha of maseh yadeha la'aviyah, maseh abat la'aviyah, to which they say, mamona miknasa lo yafinan. No, you can't learn monetary from penalties either. Knas, we already learned, is a chidush, a chichat Torah, and maybe it's not the same laws. So that's why we needed Rav Huna to give us drashat. So now we're back to, well, where do we learn boshet and pgam from? And let me start with Aviyahava. In the end, we're going to say it really is her father's. Why? And you're not going to like this reason. There's a few things we're not going to like in today's daf. The father in those days had the right to marry off, to betroth his daughter when she was young. He could betroth her to whoever he wanted. She didn't have a say in the matter because she was a minor. So theoretically, if he wanted to, he could betroth her to someone who is a disgusting person, or he had boils all over his body, which would have embarrassed her. So basically what this means, and again, it's hard to understand, but he is, since he can humiliate her if he wanted, he's in charge. Her humiliation is his, basically, to control. That's why the humiliation goes to him. Very hard concept to understand, very difficult in our day, especially, but even in those days, to say that the father has the rights to do this is very difficult. Right? Again, when we get to these topics, I don't have good answers to say, oh, well, I don't have good answers, other than to say that, again, I always say society was different, or again, sometimes a line in the Gemara might not be everything everybody agreed on either. So this was an answer given to try to come up with why this is when we don't really know why it is. So maybe it's also just an excuse they're giving, even if it's not exactly 100% true. Okay. Okay, so now we have to understand how they assess this pgam and why it's important if a maidservant is a virgin or not a virgin. So how do they do this? Right? We assess how much a person would pay to have a maidservant to serve him, whether she's a virgin or she's not a virgin. But why? Why would it matter if she's cooking his food? What does it matter to him if she's a virgin or not a virgin? He wants to marry her off to his eved, his servant. So now what does he do? He wants specifically a virgin. She'll be worth more because he wants to marry her off to his slave. So now they say, but if it's the master who's going to buy, what does he care if he gives his eved a betula or a beula? Why should that be worth it for the master to spend more money on a virgin? It's talking about an eved that basically, we all know that if you treat your slave well, your slave will work better for you. So your slave, if you give your slave a virgin, he'll be happier, he'll do his job better for the master, so therefore it is worth more for him. So it's a case where we're selling this maidservant in order to basically marry her off to the eved. What's the whole point? Because then they have children, and then he'll have more servants. Okay, more slaves. Again, another concept that's very hard for us to understand, the whole idea of slavery and purchasing women in the shuk, right? Very difficult. In general, purchasing slaves in the shuk. Okay. And obviously when it's women, checking are they virgins or not virgins, right? The whole concept is very hard to fathom. New Mishnah. We've seen this before. When there's mecher, when you can sell your daughter, the age that she could be sold to be a slave or a maidservant, there's no knas for that age. And whenever there's knas, there's no mecher, meaning those ages are mutually exclusive. What are the ages? Well, ketana yesh la mecher ve'en la knas. When she's a minor, she can be sold by her father, but If she gets raped, he doesn't get paid knas. Na'ara yesh la knas ve'en la mecher. But once she goes into the gil of na'arut, 12 and 2 simanim, for the next 6 months, then she gets the knas, but she can no longer be sold. Habogeret, and once she's a bogeret, she's beyond those 6 months, en la lo mecher ve'lo knas. And you can't sell her, and she can't get it. She doesn't get paid knas either. So the father doesn't get the knas. Also, even if she's raped when she's a bogeret, she doesn't get the knas. She only gets the knas, if you remember, she was raped as an ara and became a bogeret before he paid. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav, we already saw this, Zo Divrei Rabbi Meir. This Mishnah is Rabbi Meir. Notice, right, it doesn't say Zo Rabbi Meir Rabbi Yehuda. That was what we saw a few dapim ago. Aval Chachamim Omrim Yesh La Knas B'Mkom Mecher. But the rabbis say there is knas when there's mecher. Okay, they overlap. So now we're going to see this inside. Tanya, as it says in the following Braita, we already saw this before. From the day she's born until shtei sarot, yesh la mecher, the father can sell her. Ve'en la knas, but he won't get knas if she's raped. Misha tavi shtei sarot ba'ad shtibagel. Once 2 sarot until she gets a bogeret, yesh la knas ve'en la mecher. This is all divrei Rabbi Meir. Shaya Rabbi Meir Omer, Komakom sheyesh mecher and knas, Komakom sheyesh knas ein mecher. Right? These two are mutually exclusive. The Chachamim Omrim, right? This is basically what we saw before, except they added the exact ages of the Ketana and the Nara. Chachamim Omrim, Tana mi bat 3 shanim b'yom achav ad shtibager yesh la knas. So the rabbis say a minor from the age of 3, because until the age of 3, she's any bi'ah, sexual relations isn't considered sexual relations. So from the age of 3 until 3 and a day, till she becomes a bogeret, yesh la knas. So all the time she's a ketana from age 3 until she's a bogeret, not including bogeret, the father gets knas. So now, what about mecher? Knas im mecher lo, what? She can't get sold at all? Ema af knas b'mkom mecher. What he wants to say is there's knas in addition to mecher. Mecher actually starts from age a day, but at 3 starts the knas and they overlap. So Amar Rav Chisda, my time de Rabbi Meir. What's the reason for Rabbi Meir that she has to be a nara? So he says, Amar Krav lo tiyelisha, she becomes his wife. It sounds like in a case where she can actually marry herself. That only happens at age na'arut. Before that, as we saw before, the father can marry her off without her consent. Rabbanan, Amar Rish Lakish, Amar Khan, na'ara afilu ktana b'mashma. Rish Lakish says, the pasuk says na'ara, and notice the pasuk, the word na'ara is spelt without a hey. Because it's missing the hey, Rish Lakish says, you learn that includes even a ketana. So na'ara, if it has a hey, would mean na'ara actually. Because missing a hey, it means even younger. Shama Rav Papa b'reid Rav Chanami be'kluchit, he heard this. Azal Amar kamed Rav Shimi Barashi. Amar lei, Rav Shimi Barashi said to him, Atam nahamat ninula, ana hamat ninala. You learned Rish Lakish on this issue of the na'ara in our case about the rape, but I learned it on the Motzi Shemra case. Amar Rish Lakish, Hamotzi Shemra, ala ktana patul. If someone says that the woman is not a virgin and it turns out she really was a virgin, then he has to pay a penalty. But not if she was a ktana. Shneimar v'natnu la'aviha na'ara, na'ara malei diber katuv. And there na'ara is malei. It's written na'ara with a hey. From there we learn that na'ara with a hey is a na'ara mamash, and doesn't include ketana, which then would mean na'ara without a hey is a ketana. So it ends up being the same thing. He just learns it from a different verse. But he has a bit of a problem with Rish Lakish on this darshaning it this way. Tama de katav rachmana na'ara halav hachi avamina ketana. Are you saying the whole way we learned in Motzi Shemra is because na'ara is a hey, and without that you would have thought even a ketana if it didn't say the hey there? There's no way you would have thought it relates to a ketana because there's 2 options in the Motzi Shemra. Either he was lying or she was lying. If he was lying, he has to pay. What if she was lying? Well, haktiv, it says there, if she was lying and it turns out she wasn't a virgin, which means that she was with someone after she was betrothed to him, she was nesharish and slept with someone else. So they take her out to her father's house and they stone her. Okay, so now, if she was a minor, there's no way they would have stoned her. She doesn't get punished if she's a minor. Minors don't get punished. So it's obvious you can't learn from the na'ara that it has a hey That's how we know it's an ara, not a ktana. It's obvious from the fact that she gets stoned that we're not talking about a ktana. To which they say, no, what it means is, you're right. We learn it from the fact that she gets stoned. But once we have that, then we look at the text. What does the text say? Na'ara. From here we learn, Elakan na'ara, ha kol makom shenemar na'ara, afilu ktana b'mashma. What it's saying here is, and here it's weird that it says it without a hey, it should be with a hey. What it's saying is, this is where we learn that this is a prototype for it's a paradigm for every other case. When it says na'ara with a hey, since here it's obvious na'ara with a hey is na'ara because of the stoning, so therefore it has a hey. That means anytime it says na'ara with a hey will be like this, has to be really a na'ara. Anytime it says it without a hey, which will then teach us to our case, it will be a ktana even. And that's where the rabbis, so again, there's two ways the rabbis can prove it. Either Rish Lakish said it specifically on our case, or Rish Lakish said it elsewhere, but that basically builds the paradigm for our case as well. So with that, we understood where the rabbis come from, and we'll start with the next Mishnah starting in tomorrow's daf, perfectly at the top of the next daf. Have a great day, everyone.